The Indus Valley Civilization saw its genesis in the Holy Land known as India around 2500 BC. The people inhabiting the Indus River Valley were thought to be Dravidians, those whose descendants later migrated to the south of India. The deterioration of this civilization that developed a culture based on commerce and sustained by agriculture trade can be attributed to ecological changes. The second millennium BC was witness to the migration of the bucolic Aryan tribes from the northwest frontier into the subcontinent. These tribes gradually merged with their antecedent cultures to give birth to a new world. The Aryan tribes soon started penetrating the east, flourishing along the Ganga and Yamun rivers. By 500 BC, the whole of northern India was a civilized land where people had knowledge of iron implements and worked as labor, voluntary or otherwise. The early political map of India comprised of copious independent states with fluid boundaries, with increasing population and abundance of wealth fueling disputes over these boundaries. Unified under the famous Gupta dynasty, the north of India touched the skies as far as administration and the Hindu religion was concerned. Little wonder then that is considered to be India's golden age. By 600 BC, approximately 16 dynasties ruled the North Indian plains spanning the modern-day Afghanistan to Bangladesh. Some of the most powerful were the dynasties ruling the kingdoms of Magadha, Kosala, Kuru, and Gandhara. Known to be the land of epics and legends, two of the world's greatest epics find their birth in Indian settings. The Ramayana, depicting the explodings of Ram, and the Mahabharata, detailing the war between Kauravas and Pandavas, both descendants of King Bharat. Ramayana traces Lord Ram's journey from exile to the rescue of his wife, Sita, from the demonic clutches of Ravana with the help of his simian companions, singing the virtues of Dharma, which means duty. The Gita, one of the most prized sculptures in Indian mythology, is the advice given by Sri Krishna to the grief-laden Arjun, who is terrified at the thought of killing his kin on the battleground. Mahatma Gandhi revived these virtues again, breathing new life in them. During India's freedom struggle against British colonialism, an ardent believer in communal harmony, he dreamt of a land where all religions would be the threads to form a rich social fabric. Now that we've got a bit of knowledge on the history of India, the country where my entire family history is from, let's talk about my direct family who have immigrated to Canada. My father's parents and my mother's parents were all born and raised in Punjab, India. Let's start off talking about my father's side of the family. My grandparents had my father in 1950, 3 years after India's declaration of independence, and he's the eldest of 3 half-brothers and 2 half-sisters, who weren't born until several years later. My dad came to Canada and married a lady who he had 4 daughters with, who are all now in their late 20s, but they ended up getting divorced. My father went back to India to get his entire family to immigrate to Canada, and he also married my mom while she was there. My dad then came back to Canada and with all his half-brothers and sisters, with his father, his stepmother, and my mother. My dad's entire family immigrated for a couple reasons: to explore the world, to find good jobs, and to settle down somewhere with a bright future for their children. On the other hand, my mother had been married too. Her husband had passed away, but she had 1 daughter, my half-sister, who lived with us for almost 18 years. My mom married my dad and came to Canada with him. 3 years later, my parents brought my mother's daughter to Canada. Another year or so later, my parents had my brother. And another year later, they had me. There were several reasons my parents immigrated to Canada. Some push factors of India include lack of jobs, the caste system, the environmental problems like pollution and deforestation, natural disasters, and violence. Although Punjab was a very nice place, my parents just did not want to stay there. Women could not get jobs, and men were offered with very little pay. My dad brought his entire family, and my mother came alone with her daughter. Although my mother tried to get her parents to come to Canada with her, they did not want to. They had built too much in Punjab, and they felt like they did not need to move. We still visit at my mother's sides of the family all the time. Now there was a lot of push factors from India, but there were also several pull factors from Canada. Some of these pull factors include the high standard of living, the high standard of education, many job opportunities, free healthcare, multiculturalism, and welfare. My parents had to think a lot about their future children when moving, so they decided Canada, a multicultural area with a lot of opportunities. When my parents came to Canada, it was a struggle to find a job. My mom stayed at home, and my dad delivered newspapers. When my mother was born and my dad needed to work harder, so he got a higher level of education and started driving a truck for a couple months. My mother had me 1 year after my brother, and that's when things started looking up. My mom found a job at a factory, and so did my dad. They worked at the same factory, but my dad quit after about a year. He started to drive a taxi, and ever since he has been. My father removed his turban when he came back to Canada because he knew the discrimination the Sikh people were facing in the time, especially after 9/11. Me and my brother grew up wearing turbans for about a year from age 5 to 6. But my dad saw the discrimination that all Sikhs, Hindus, and Muslims were facing after 9/11, and he insisted to my mother that we take them off. My brother and I grew up in the Greater Toronto area. We moved a lot from apartment to apartment, but when we bought our first house, that's when we really settled down, and that's the house that we still currently live in. In the future, my brother plans to be an architect, and I plan to be a police officer. That's my place in Canadian history. Cheers.